The prodigal son returned.
The prodigal son returns.
Hey, I'm Sambo, alcoholic addict in recovery for almost 5 years. And this is a follow-up to the video I made on why the Pitt has the most accurate portrayal of addiction in any TV show or movie that I've ever seen. If you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend checking it out before watching this. But at the time when I made that video, only 11 out of the 15 episodes in the first season had come out. And it turns out that our boy Langdon actually shows back up in those final few episodes. And I wanted to make this follow-up video for a couple of reasons. One, to see if any of my predictions were correct in that first video. But also, we just got the trailer for season 2, which does show Langdon coming back to the Pitt. And so I want to make kind of a few predictions for season 2 and what we can kind of expect with that arc. So let's get everyone back up to speed with where we left off the last video, which was Langdon being booted out of the hospital by Robbie after the revelation of his addiction, the fact that he had been stealing prescriptions from patients. And shortly after Langdon leaves the hospital, we kind of see the seminal moment that the Pitt had been building up to as like the overarching plot line, which is the mass casualty event, the shooting that happens at Pitt Fest. And with dozens and dozens and dozens of patients coming into the hospital, we also see Langdon come back into the hospital, sort of creeping his way back in. Now, as an addict, I think there's kind of really two things happening here with Langdon showing back up. One being that I genuinely think that he wants to come in and help during this horrific event. As we've seen, he is a phenomenal doctor who, is fantastic at his job, really loves what he does. But I also believe, as like an addict and an alcoholic, that Langdon really sees this as opportunistic. He really kind of sees this as the opportunity or the beginning of his sort of redemption tale, where if he kind of shows back up, he might be able to right some of his wrongs and still kind of completely in denial of the situation that he finds himself in.
Trust me.
Oh, we're a little late for that.
The old trust me when you've absolutely shattered trust no less than 1 hour ago. Been there more times than I care to admit. And Robbie actually allows kind of Langdon to stay, likely because he doesn't have the capacity to kind of deal with this right now, but also partially probably due to the fact that he could really use the help. And Langdon had this addiction under his nose because he was so kind of competent as a physician. And Robbie kind of gives his reasoning, which we'll see later on, when he says, it seemed like sacrificing my medical career for the greater good of this event seemed like an appropriate choice at the time. And how does Langdon do in this mass casualty event? He be cooking. As mentioned in the last video, functioning alcoholism and addiction is exactly that. We continue to see him function at a very high level. He is clearly getting in the mix with patients. We continue to see him kind of showing empathy and serving as really like a role model for a lot of the interns who are there. And what do we also see is we see Langdon continue to do addict and alcoholic type shit. Like I previously mentioned, I really think that Langdon kind of is seeing this as an opportunity to redeem himself. We see him, in the midst of kind of dealing with these patients, also make a point to go to Santos and say, good job.
Good work. Keep it up.
And obviously she was the person who kind of outed his secret to Robbie and how he finds himself in this position now, to try and kind of get in her good graces, which is completely manipulative, only for them to kind of cross paths later. And you can kind of see the visible disdain that Langdon has for her as a result of outing that secret. We'll see him kind of saving a patient's life only a split second later to be kind of sizing up his colleagues to see what people do and don't know.
MCI 33 to yellow for monitoring.
Langdon has an axe to grind by coming back. Again, it's not saying that he doesn't want to be there and helping patients, and there's a genuine kind of motive for also being there, but both things can be true. He can want to be helping, doing exactly that, while also kind of having in the back of his mind this ulterior motive of okay, this is my opportunity to show that I am a good person. I am a good physician. I am competent. Again, really kind of living in that denial of the situation where he finds himself.
Is Dr. Ellis running this resuscitation, or are you? Because last time I checked, you're not supposed to be here.
This really kind of goes on for a few episodes, but in the penultimate episode and the final episode, we start to see kind of things start to wind down from the mass casualty event, kind of the Pitt getting their footing. And as the Pitt gets their footing, the reality of Langdon's situation really starts to settle in. One thing that I think is really interesting here that I don't know if it was intentional, but as this reality sets in, we really start to see Langdon kind of go through the stages of grief, almost as if we're seeing the ending of what he perceives to be his life, his career. He starts to kind of flip-flop through the different stages of grief throughout this. And I believe that the stages of grief really kind of kicks off when he asks Robbie to talk.
Can we talk?
Go home. I don't want to tell you again.
You needed me.
Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?
Only if you report me.
We really kind of see that bargaining starting to happen where he is almost in the form of like manipulation to say to Robbie, well, if you don't say anything, then I won't get in trouble. We see that bargaining again when he starts to kind of probe Nurse Dana around like what she does know, what she doesn't know.
Hey, is this a good time?
No, got a missing patient. You seen a woman with a scalp black last name Chew?
No, but I need to talk to you.
So talk. You treat a woman with a scalp black named Chew?
Doesn't ring a bell.
You're a lot of help. Start wrapping up and get out of here.
Gladly.
In private.
And again, it's kind of like that weird amalgamation of, this grief response of bargaining, but also to like him doing that addict type behavior where he's trying to like size up a situation, see where he can manipulate, see where he can kind of shape the narrative, deceive, things like that. And in that same kind of conversation with Nurse Dana, we see shifting from that kind of bargaining stage of grief to that depression where we really kind of see him start to break down and, really be kind of fearful for what's going to be happening next.
Robbie believes something that's not entirely true.
That's not like Robbie.
I need you to have my back on this.
This show really continues to nail its accuracy. Here, like I've hit bottom many times, and each time I was there, just that fear of not knowing what's going to happen next is so real. And where am I going to be sleeping tonight? Do people still want me in their life? Have I fucked everybody over? Where am I going to get my next meal? It's truly so scary. And it's the thing when you're on the other side of it, the only way is up. But, in saying that in hindsight is a lot easier than when you're actually kind of going through it. It's really, the show just continues to kind of, nail that. And I love what really happens here between, Nurse Dana and Langdon, in the sense that clearly she's like a comfort. She's, she basically runs the Pitt. So she's showing that empathy and kind of being that comfort there for Langdon, but also as someone who is able to kind of step outside of that situation, isn't, the perpetrator or the transgressor. She knows that things are going to be okay. And she says, you're a smart kid, you'll figure it out. And I really love that, because I definitely had moments like that when I was at that same point where certain people were kind of there as that voice of reason, where they were able to kind of comfort me in that time of crisis. And this brings us to that final confrontation showdown, which we were all kind of waiting for between Robbie and Langdon. And oh boy, the emotions are flying here.
Thanks for letting me come back. I was never high. I was just treating my own withdrawal symptoms.
Well, you should have done that under the care and supervision of a physician.
With that on my record, I could have my hospital privileges denied whenever I apply for a job.
No, that's not true anymore.
And I really just love this so much. When Robbie says, that's not true anymore. Back 30, 40 years, if you were to do this, could have very well been the end of his career. And it really kind of speaks to, despite how much ground we still have to make up in terms of the stigma for mental health and addiction and things like that, it really has kind of come a long way where this does kind of happen in modern day and people's careers aren't ended. There is help available, and there's an understanding that this does kind of happen. And there is that ability to kind of, have that second chance. And since we're bargaining, or since, Langdon is bargaining, Robbie comes to the table with his offer of, that second chance for him.
Here's your second chance. 30-day inpatient treatment program, followed by random urine tests, 50 to 60 a year, followed by mandatory NA meetings 3 to 4 times a week for the first 3 years.
3
Of a
years?
5-year program. You need help.
It turns out I was somewhat pretty accurate here in terms of what Langdon will have to do to kind of get back on the right track. So obviously the 30-day inpatient stay, random urine screenings, 50 to 60 a year, the mandatory NA meetings. And that likely feels like a very tall order right now for Langdon. But in my opinion, very fair in terms of what needs to be done. The thing that's really kind of interesting about Langdon's situation is that he is going to be, if he's back in the hospital, by virtue of his career, he's going to be exposed to narcotics on a daily basis. And I think that's really where the urine tests and the NA meetings are going to be paramount because, for myself, like my main weapon of choice was alcohol, right? And after I got sober, if I had to show up to a bar every single day just to spend time in there, I think that'd be really tough. Or I think of food addiction. One of the things that's really challenging about food addiction is the fact that you have to eat to survive. And so I think having that kind of in place as like an ongoing, remedy or treatment makes sense here. And in the final kind of exchange of words, we see Langdon shift from bargaining denial to finally introducing, anger into the situation.
What about you, man? What about you? I'm not the only one who's a little fucked up here, Robbie. I wasn't the one talking to cartoon animals and peds. Fuck you!
So bargaining and anger in the form of really kind of, projecting onto Robbie directly, which is standard addict alcoholic behavior. And Robbie here delivers maybe like one of my favorite lines ever, like in TV, movies, life in general.
I never had a complete meltdown.
No, you just cause them in other people.
You just cause those meltdowns in other people. And it's so true. We saw all season long him snapping, at different staff in the pit. Santos caught, the brunt of it oftentimes. And that's really what addicts and alcoholics do when they're using, is that they cause the people around them to really suffer. And we kind of see Robbie after this walk away with a final. And that's the final exchange. And that's the final time that we see, Langdon. And clearly been a very long day for everybody involved here. And that final exchange was, understandably very heated. But as we know, we do see Langdon come back in the trailer for the second season. But from the trailer for the second season, we know that Langdon does ultimately return. For how long that he is gone, I'm not too sure. If someone knows in the comments, please let me know. But, this obviously infers that cooler heads did prevail the next day, the day after at some point, and a kind of treatment or a next step plan was put in place for Langdon. And with that, here are my kind of predictions on what we're going to see happen with our boy Langdon in season 2. So Langdon likely has completed some form of inpatient stay and then potentially some form of leave of absence after that. I think one thing that sometimes gets overlooked or not discussed when it comes to recovery is that when people go to rehab, in rehab, you're kind of in this bubble, right? It's very regimented, it's structured. You're obviously not able to have access to, substances. It's very kind of controlled, and adapting to life after rehab can be kind of really tricky because life comes at you very fast. I think that we will see Langdon cooking again. As we know, he's a very talented physician, very good at his job. But I also think we'll see him really struggle with kind of a few things. The first thing, to my earlier point, being temptations. He's around narcotics in the hospital to treat pain, to treat anxiety, to treat seizures. And that's where he was stealing and getting his supply from before. So that's obviously going to be a struggle for him as he kind of adapts, back to real life, back to his career. The second thing I think is going to be him really coming to terms with, humility and the situation that he finds himself in, that he's going to really kind of struggle with. You know, being around like Santos and kind of dealing with those emotions right there. And there's potential that he will have privileges stripped of him, and basically having the humility to be able to deal with that. And kind of to the earlier point around, you know, 12-step being a part of it, Narcotics Anonymous or any other kind of 12-step fellowship. One of the core tenets of, you know, those 12-step programs is humility and kind of cleaning up your side of the street. And I think we see, you know, Langdon as someone who's very, he has a lot of hubris. He has a lot of pride. He's got a pretty big ego, and he's going to have to really kind of come to terms with that and let a lot of that go. You know, being around Santos and kind of potentially having some of his privileges stripped. And then another final kind of prediction, or what I'd really, I guess, love to see is, you know, obviously Langdon not relapsing when he's back in the pit, but really also helping out any patients that come in with addiction that are struggling and kind of, you know, sharing his experience of strength and hope with them, you know, and kind of really utilizing that empathy and that relatability that we have seen from him for that kind of cause and kind of helping out those patients. Thanks for watching. We'd love to hear in the comments what you think is going to happen with Langdon. I know season 2 drops in, I believe, January, so really excited for that. But would love to hear your thoughts. Appreciate you watching this video as always. Love ya. We'll see you in the next one.